All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, in the book of 2 Timothy chapter 3, starting at verse 1, it says, "In the last days perilous times shall come." And when you read downward, it states that men shall be lovers of their own selves. And that's what we see today gaining greater and greater prominence, especially in these various Luciferian and esoteric movements, where you have these brothers who claim to be enlightened, when in all reality, all they are worshipers of themselves. And someone who venerates themselves will never have the ultimate answer, particularly for society. They cannot think on a macrocosmic level. They're too busy obsessing over their own ego and casting themselves as a Christ-like figure. And you run into these cats all the time, whether it's a dude who was locked up, or a brother who joined a certain group, or read too many books, or claims or alleges to know about the society or the culture of ancient Kemet and Babylon, and is trying to apply it to himself today. There are so many confused cats out here who are going to destroy themselves with their phony, fictitious misunderstanding of the concept of Christ consciousness. What biblical Christ consciousness is understanding your order and your place and fulfilling your duty here on the earth. And through that, the Most High will glorify you in that day and in that hour where it's already been predestined that you will be glorified. But not until you humble yourself. That's why Christ stated what? He said, "He that humbles himself shall be exalted, and he that exalts himself shall be abased." Right? We're going to see many men in this fleshly time try to exalt themselves as saviors and solvers of problems. And we see it all throughout the sports world. And it's very conducive for them to do that for the simple fact that they've been worshipped for the vast majority of their lives. That's why mainstream professional athletes make terrible societal leaders, for the simple fact that just because they happen to be quote unquote melanated does not mean that they understand the plight or the struggle of the average so-called black man. LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, since they were 10 years old, 12 years old, 14 years old, have been feted as wonderkins on the basketball court. There have been many provisions made for them and avenues opened for them because most of their handlers understood who they were going to become. And they knew how special those brothers were on the basketball court. And that translates to what? Dollar signs. They cannot fully relate to the average so-called black man who has to struggle to keep a job, hope to get a job, every day not know when his relationship is going to end, when he might get evicted from his apartment or taken out of his home, when he'll be able to see his children if he gains the permission of his so-called ex or baby mama. Might be ran through the court system. LeBron James, Kyrie Irving will never have to worry about that. And that's why they're great pawns for the liberal Caucasians that puppeteer them. And Kyrie Irving is a puppet as well, no matter what he says. He can speak about the pawns in the media. He's also a pawn. And that's why he showed himself to be someone who was having a mental and spiritual breakdown in the aftermath of the quote unquote insurrection at the Capitol building. If you're truly a god, like you allege yourself to be, why would the actions of low-level Caucasians affect you to such a degree that you force yourself to sit out and basically highlight how undependable you are and how you're not a leader? Because leaders are born, they're not made. Like Shakespeare stated, some men are born great, some men ascend or achieve greatness, and other men have greatness cast upon them. So some people have that leadership gene within them and it lies dormant. But when they're placed in a certain position, they're going to rise to the occasion because that's just who they are. Kyrie is not a leader. Never has been, never will be. He's someone who aspires to be a leader because what that does is that fits into what his personality is actually about, that being attention mongering. Kyrie is someone who thinks that he's smarter and more important than he actually is. He thinks that he's going to use his so-called great understanding of the hermetic systems to quote unquote save the world. And he's not at all. All he's going to continue to do if he's not careful is expose himself as a charlatan who's going to be ran out of the NBA. There are many things that Kyrie says that I agree with and that I like. During the time period where the NBA was having their little Black Lesbians Matter bubble tournament, he stated that so-called blacks should form their own basketball league. I agree. But the reason why that will never happen is because the so-called black man does not have a ruling class mentality and he's not willing to sacrifice. On top of that, Kyrie is the wrong mouthpiece for a venture like that because he's shown himself time and time again to be someone who will retreat off into his own corner until it suits him when he knows that he's cast himself as a leader. When you're a leader, whether it's a father figure or what have you, you have to make sure that you always live up to the reputation that you're trying to put onto yourself. Now, if Kyrie just wants to be a regular dude who's just talented on the basketball court, that's something different. But he claims to be a transformative figure, or wants to be. He wants to be a so-called teacher or a sage. And quite frankly, he's none of those things. He comes off as a very confused young man who still thinks like a little boy because he was never forced to mature due to being put through real hardships in life. What real hardships has Kyrie been put through in life? Very few to none. That's why he's so eager to worship the divine feminine, because he thinks a lot like a female does. He moves according to his feelings and his emotions. But anyway, he's made his return to the Brooklyn Nets. We'll see how long that lasts. I do believe that right now, whether Kyrie understands it or not, he's going through a tryout period with the team, where they're going to work out within their minds what the configuration or the lineups should be for that squad. Does Kyrie fit together with James Harden and Kevin Durant? To me, if I had my druthers, they should move Kyrie for some length, that being for some perimeter defenders as well as some rim protectors. They need that desperately. If the Nets are going to win a championship, they're going to have to make a big trade, another big trade, for some rim protectors and for some perimeter defenders, so that Harden and KD can get a break on the defensive end. They don't need Kyrie. Just watching how James Harden and Kevin Durant were working together, they looked seamless. Beautiful offense between the two of them. Between those two guys and their shooters, they're fine on offense. They don't need a player in a Kyrie Irving who wants to dribble, and get all the spotlight and take a lot of contested mid-range jump shots. Kyrie, unfortunately for him, he's a bit too talented for his own good. And he's modeled himself after the wrong player. He tries to be Kobe Bryant when he should be modeling himself after Isaiah Thomas. But anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Well, in the NBA, Kyrie Irving is expected to be back on the court tonight against the Cavs after missing the Nets' last 7 games for personal reasons and conditioning. Kyrie was also heavily fined for violating health and safety protocol while he was away from his team. Now take a listen to Kyrie's explanation for that.
I'm back. I'm happy to be back.
No, you're not. Let's be for real, bro. The reason why you're back right now is because the story was getting old. You thought that people were going to ask you certain questions about the Capitol insurrection, and maybe you could cast yourself as this woke social commentator and try to elevate your profile in that way. Indirectly, he's still trying to compete with LeBron. It's very unfortunate because neither one of them know or understand exactly what's going on in this society. They're too busy trying to summon the energies of witchcraft. If you're paying very close attention, you can see that in his left ear, Kyrie has an earring of the Ankh. So he's still trying to play with those comedic forces, and he has no real idea what he's doing.
And we got some great pieces, and we just move on. And I let my actions and my game speak for itself, like I planned on doing.
Right, but brother, no disrespect. You're not a good defensive player. You're not really what the Nets need right now. The real question is, if the Nets decide to move Kyrie Irving, what can they get back for him because his stock is so low, as talented and as gifted as he is?
Just needed a pause.
Oh, we about to dive in some murky water.
Once again, the cat said he needed a pause. That's something that so-called black men that live in the real world know they cannot pursue, a quote-unquote pause. There's only time to hustle. That's it. Or you're going to get fired from your job. Now, Kyrie is so great at what he does. I mean, literally, at 6'2", $190, or however much he weighs, there's probably only about 2 or 3 other players on the entire planet Earth with his skill set. A Steph Curry, a Dame Lillard, and maybe 1 or 2 other players on the entire planet Earth. So he can afford to do that. But once again, that's why it's not really feasible to cast him as someone who understands the plight of the average so-called black man, because he's been anointed since his youth. How much can he really understand? He doesn't even understand culpability and accountability.
Do you have an issue with Kyrie Irving saying he just needed a pause?
You know me well enough. You know I do. Okay, let's talk about this. Kyrie Irving, who I adore. Yeah, I can say it. I can say it in the masculine tone as well. I adore Kyrie Irving.
That's a bit much. I appreciate Kyrie's greatness as a phenomenal offensive player. Very exciting to watch.
fullness almost, because he owns who he is.
I agree with that to a degree. I don't think that he fully owns who he is, because if he fully owned who he was, he would acknowledge how confused he is, and he doesn't. Instead, he tries to act as if he understands these various situations, and due to his ego and his massive martyr complex and his fake Christ consciousness complex, he thinks that everyone is supposed to pay attention to him and what he does behind the scenes to supposedly heal the world. You're not going to heal the world, because this world is not preordained to be healed. It's preordained to be destroyed, thus saith the scriptures. But because you're a self-worshipper, you're never going to understand that. So therefore, you're probably going to have to be removed along with this old world.
And even with consequence, he's still going to be Kyrie Irving. And he knows the response. He knows how we're going to look at him in certain moments. Look at his timeline of events and issues over the years. Kyrie doesn't give a damn. I love that ownership of Kyrie. Kyrie being Kyrie. On the basketball court, very few things you can say that is bad about this guy.
I'm not quite sure about that. He's a terrible defender. And due to the fact that, once again, he's modeled his game after the wrong player, he tends to pass with no real sense of timing. If Kyrie were a more pass-oriented player, he'd probably fit in better with a KD or with a James Harden. But he seems very awkward when he's off the ball. He's very uncomfortable.
That said, when I saw he needed a pause, oh, that made me pause. And all of a sudden look at my adoration for him and say, might that justice just a little.
Well, you should never have adoration for another man. That's always going to lead to destruction. You shouldn't even have adoration for yourself like Kyrie Irving does. That leads to self-destruction.
My man, and I don't know him well. We've seen each other before. He probably is like, who? The big fat guy? Me. I'm going to talk to you now, Kyrie, the big fat guy. Here's the thing that I don't like about needing a pause. There are about 6 or 7 moments every day that I need a pause.
Agreed.
A married man with 3 kids under the age of 5 years old, and another one that's 21 trying to figure out what she's going to do in the real world. At least 6 times. I'll give you my latest example. I was in the pool a couple of days ago with my son. My son's 5 years old. He's already bigger than me, so he's punking me. We're over there wrestling in the pool, having fun. We have these little squirters. He squirts me, I squirt him. There's a lot more of me to squirt than him. So he aims for the eyes. What? And I looked at him. And then I was like, don't do that. Not in the eyes. It could hurt Daddy. He processed that. He heard no. And then he still went, what? Time out time, right? I needed to pause because I wanted to put some child protection services.
Absolutely. A child and a woman are very similar. You have to provide boundaries for them or they're going to keep going. And his son did that because the son wanted to see if he was going to enforce the boundary that he just set.
I want to put some pause on it. I'm sitting here one eye like on time out. I'm like, boy. The point is that was one of my 6 pause moments of the day. But you know what I do? I keep on moving.
That's all anyone can do is keep moving forward, man. There's so much bullshit you're going to encounter in this life. So many fake ass people, so many bad situations. If you don't keep moving, you're going to dwell on situations that you shouldn't, and you're going to end up in prison or in an early grave. Period.
On walking. You have to, because 1, we're mentally tough enough to do that. 2, we can compartmentalize. 3, Kyrie Irving made the fatal flaw right here, which is connecting everything in his world. And a lot of people do this. They have an issue here, they have an issue here, and they have an issue there. And don't look at them independently. Think that they're all a part of this script, a part of this play that's going on inside their head. And all of a sudden, you start to address that in totality instead of individually by every single element.
Because Kyrie's never had a real boss his whole life. Even his coaches, he does not look at as authority figures. He just doesn't. I think that the only man he accepts any level of authoritarianism from is his pops. And his pops probably raised him in a very liberal, cavalier fashion. I remember seeing a video of Kyrie's dad in his home, and there was a statue of the Buddha there. Now, Buddhism is one of the fountains or the founts of self-worship when it comes to religious systems. So I'm sure that pretty much was Kyrie's inspiration, leading him to Hermeticism, because Buddhism is basically just the Far Eastern version of many of the components of the Babylonian Kemetic mystery school system, along with Hinduism. That's why in the 50s and 60s, a lot of the New Age belief systems that were brought here to America were brought back from Caucasians who went to the Far East, to Tibet, to India, to Nepal, to learn from the Buddhist monks and the yogis and, you know, people like that, a lot of the Hindu sages, and they brought those beliefs back here to America.
Tell everybody all the time, happiness is not just a choice. We've heard that. You got to choose to be happy. Nuh-uh. Happiness or anything you want is a commitment.
Agreed. And it's a sacrifice too. It's a commitment that has a series of sacrifices that you have to make. Because many times when you're on the path towards happiness or contentment, people in your life that you love or that you thought loved you are going to try, or at least be prompted by the Spirit, to force you to make decisions that are going to revolve around whether or not you want to continue to pursue your happiness or you want to pursue their happiness by following after their narrative.
A little more than choice. Because choice, think about it, when you get married, one day you will. So it's a commitment. It's through the highs and through the lows. Kyrie, through the highs of your family issues, personal issues, through the lows of those, stay committed to all things and to all tasks. So when
all Kyrie was showing you was that he's not a leader. My issue with Kyrie is that he keeps trying to cast himself as a leader, and he's not. He's very immature. He's a very young boy. Whenever I see these guys that fall into this worship of the woman, the divine feminine, it tells me that they're not really leadership material type dudes. Because that's just another way of passing the buck onto the woman, who'll take it. She'll take the glorification, and she'll take the adulation of being assigned the leadership role. But when the going gets tough, she's going to look to a male figure to assist her and to provide real leadership. That's why the so-called black woman does not respect the so-called black man as a leader right now, because she sees who's empowered right now.
A pause from this, it made me pause at why he took a pause.
That's a good take. Now, again, understanding this is a sensitive and tough topic, I will say this. I don't have an issue with it because I can't have an issue with it, but I do see the problem with it. Why do I say I can't? First off, let's preface with this. Y'all are watching two athletes that played the game at the highest level, though one better than the other. Y'all are also watching athletes who have studied mental health, both undergraduate, but more importantly at a graduate degree. So y'all are talking to athletes that have experienced it and have also studied it. So the issue is, mental health is very real. And Kyrie Irving, I understand you have to set boundaries for yourself.
Absolutely. That's the most important thing in maintaining your mental and even more importantly, your spiritual health, is setting boundaries. There are certain things to say and not to say. There are certain things that you can allow people to say to you and that you should not and cannot allow people to say to you. Not even necessarily profane, but just in an attempt to cause a disturbance within your spirit, and they're purposefully doing it. You understand? That's why it's very important to understand and know when to cut people off.
Here is the problem I can see with it. When you get to a certain level of fame, when you acquire a certain amount of money, you lose some rights. You lose some luxury.
Rights?
What do I mean by that?
Yeah, please.
Marcellus, you and I probably don't have the luxury, if we will, of getting cut off in traffic and flipping off the person who cut us off. Why? Because somebody might know who we are. You and I don't have a luxury of being in a bad mood, going to a grocery store. Oh my gosh, Marcellus, I love your work. Oh my God, Emmanuel, I love your conversations. Bro, I don't have the luxury of always being able to.
Now, I hope some of you brothers out there who might not understand why I talk about fanboys saw what Emmanuel Acho did. He was showing you how he views a fan. You understand that? You should never be a fan of another person. If you were to see an Emmanuel Acho or a Marcellus Wiley out in the street, the extent of your interaction with them should be, hey brother, great job, peace, and keep it moving. They appreciate that way more than the fanboying and walking up and speaking to them like you know them and all the extended conversations, the daps, and can I have a photo and all this other shit. That's what he was trying to convey to you with that little blurb right there.
Respond in the way in which my emotions want me to respond because I've been given a certain position. Kyrie Irving, you've been given a certain position. They are paying you a certain amount of money not to make you immune to your mental taxation at the time, not to make you immune to it, but to help you figure out how to tolerate it. See, these sports, unlike any other industry, you get 4 months off during the year. You ain't working a 9 to 5 year round where you can get paid time off, take 2 weeks here, take 2 weeks there. You were off 4 months out of the year.
Right, but you know what? That's not really the issue, brother. I understand what you're trying to get at. But the real problem is that Kyrie Irving has been broken down mentally by the events of 2020. And that's because underneath all the fake pro-black rambling and the espousing of Luciferian principles, he's still just another woke nigga that wants the so-called white man to give him a hug. That's what he is. That's why he was so mentally fractured by what he saw during the quote-unquote insurrection at the Capitol building. That bothered him and many other woke blacks because what that represented was a large segment of so-called Caucasians who don't give a fuck about the emotions of the average liberal Negro. The liberal Negro, both male and female, want the Caucasian to care about how they feel.
Build up. If you know that a famine is coming, then you will start to make sure you store up for yourself some goods so that you can endure the famine.
Well, I understand what you're trying to say with that, with that metaphor, that story that you're trying to align with the Kyrie Irving situation. But, we're living in an outlier event, that being the pandemic, the global pandemic that's been used to trigger a lot of contrived racial upheavals. And most of these Negroes operate on a low level mentally when it comes to the racial rapport with the other ethnicities. Our people have been taught that we're supposed to obsess over the other races, and the other races should be willing to extend the olive branch. And with the way in which race has been covered this year by the mainstream liberal media, is ratcheted up the feelings of the so-called black man and woman within their mind about what they're owed. A lot of this has to do with entitlement issues.
We played in the NFL. You played in it, and I played in it. You understand that there is an emotional famine. There is a spiritual famine. There's a psychological famine. There is a physiological famine. There is a physical famine. Every famine is coming during a sports season. So what must you do in the off season? You have to do the best you can to make sure you get an abundance of mental, psychological, spiritual, emotional, physiological help so that you can endure the test that is coming. Because to Marcellus's point, and this is where I'm going to end my first lap.
Well, let's keep going.
We're in the middle of a global pandemic. We're in the middle of racial upheaval and racial tension.
That's right, brother. And those are the exact reasons why your metaphor or your analogy of the famine is not really pertinent. Because this was an unforeseen famine. At least for people like a Kyrie Irving who don't believe in the scriptures, who believe that he is his own God. And once again, you're going to see a major falling away of these niggas that try to espouse these nonsensical diatribes and philosophies and ideologies about how they're their own God and the black woman is God. A lot of these guys are going to fall by the wayside in these last days as things get worse and worse. You're going to see them have mental and spiritual breakdowns in public. A lot of them are going to remove themselves, honestly. But people who stay in the scriptures and who understand the comings and goings of the Most High and how he moves, you're not going to be moved.
Middle of presidential change. We're in the middle of climate change. If you pay attention to any and all of those things, you will need a pause every.
How did climate change get into this? Is there an era where the climate wasn't changing? Have we not endured multiple ice ages? I'm not saying that climate change is not necessarily a quote unquote real thing. I just think that it's something that's always occurred. Now, if you want to talk about carbon emissions and how it's affecting the atmosphere and so on and so forth, well, that's going to be the byproduct of a highly mechanized society. But here's the problem. You have oil magnates, people who, quote unquote, run the world behind the scenes, who are able to subsidize their rulership through fossil fuels. But you know what? That's a whole other conversation for another day.
Single moment of every single day. So you have to try to figure out as best you can while still protecting yourself how to navigate all these things and keep pushing forward because they're compensating you to do so.
Oh, yeah. Imagine if you're at home right now, because I was, as much as people have seen me accomplish things, even in my accomplishment failures within it, my career wasn't top notch. people come at you, and imagine if you're someone at home who doesn't have the occupation that I've had and I have, which is talking sports for a living or playing sports for a living, which is pretty high in terms of things that people would love to do and aspire to do.
Yes, according to the lust of the mind and the lust of the flesh. I think that Marcellus Wiley, in a roundabout way, is admitting that as a former athlete, no, he's cast as a paragon in this society, even though he doesn't deserve it.
I know how this lands to other people. Kyrie Irving, who loses $850,000 in this last week or so, and it's
right, but that's a negligible loss
to Kyrie Irving, and some people are like, oh my God, and then what did you lose it for, Kyrie Irving, is what I think a lot of people would take issue with. Because Kyrie Irving says he had family issues, personal issues, and then he made a comment about how the weight of the world is on his shoulders.
Issues, all that.
No, it's not. The weight of social media is on his shoulders. Kyrie watches too much television, and he has too many empty conversations with souls that are as empty as his are about to be if he continues on his path. You know, energy is exponential. If you're around other people who have the same spirit as you, you're going to augment each other exponentially, no matter what the polarity of that spirit is. If both of you guys are negative and you're around each other, you're going to augment each other's negative energy. Same thing with positive. Same thing if you have the spirit of truth, or if you have the spirit of self-worship, like Kyrie does. When he's around these other fake woke dudes, these other hermeticists and alchemists, they're going to tell him what he's supposed to do as a proverbial god here on the earth. And that's going to create a burden that should not exist, because all Kyrie is a basketball player. There's nothing that Kyrie is going to say that's going to save or enlighten the world in the fucking least. Not him, LeBron James, Steph Curry, or anybody else.
Fighting for unity and equality. And I'm going to be the guy, you know me, I'm an eternal optimist, but I'm also a realist.
Yes, sir, please, let's get there, because Marcellus Wiley is about to say something that I've told you brothers repeatedly, and it's something that's just a fact of this reality, assuming that you can understand reality and dwell here as opposed to your own fictionalized realm where many people dwell.
And to consolidate being an eternal optimist and a realist, you come to places sometimes where you feel like you're by yourself. I have a thought process that there's no such thing as equality.
Absolutely not. There's no such thing as equality. The Most High did not create people to be equal. He did not create nations to be equal. He put us all here within this three-dimensional realm, and certain nations have their time to rule, and they're taken out of power, and then other nations have their time to rule, and within nations you have individuals who've been created to be greater than others. Now, the reason why we have a government system and a judicial system is to make sure that everyone has to suffer the same repercussions for their actions. And that's what needs to be watched and monitored. But in regards to trying to police people to all be the same, no, that's contrary to the creative process.
I read a book a long time ago called Self-Talk that helped me understand my conversations, not with a black man or uncomfortable conversations with white people or anything, but the conversation I have with my best friend every day, myself.
Absolutely.
And it talks to you about listening to that dialogue and not ignoring it, but paying attention to the world. Most people pay attention more to the words they hear on the outside than they do on the inside.
Absolutely. And that's a major problem. And, you know, that's the core of the concept of peer pressure. The reason why other people around you try to pressure you to do things that the collective is doing is because they know that they were subjected to it and they were too weak to resist it. So misery loves company. That's the reason why you have gangs in the so-called black community, and, you know, the propagation of the concept of drug dealing in the so-called black community. This notion that those are the only options that the so-called black man has. Like Biggie said, the streets is a short stop. Either you're selling crack rock or you got a wicked jump shot. No, those are constraints that he put on his own possibilities and his own future, because that's what other people told him. Because once you start to pursue scholastics and academics, those same people who told you that your only options were to be an entertainer or a basketball player are going to call you a sellout. And those are the problems that exist within the so-called black community. People who operate on a lesser wavelength than you, trying to pull you down with them because it's going to make them feel better about their own life failures.
I really don't. Now, that book led me to other books that made me understand one thing, that equality doesn't exist, bro.
Not at all, nor is it meant to.
No two siblings are the same.
There are no two damn particles that are the same, Marcellus Wiley. That's why they state that no two snowflakes are the same when put under a microscope or when scrutinized. The Most High creates everything to be alike but different, if that makes sense.
My sister's my best friend. Boy, she can do some things I can't, and vice versa.
Thank you, sir. Once again, men and women are not equal. I think that that's what Marcellus Wiley was trying to get to in a roundabout way. The woman is gifted and beautiful and wonderful in her own way, as is the man. To say that they're equal would be equivalent to saying that you only need two locks. You don't need a lock and a key. No, you need both because they complement one another. That's the point. One goes inside, the other receives.
No two siblings are the same, so no two family members are the same. No two family communities are the same. No two communities are the same. No two areas are the same. No two you get where I'm coming from. You don't believe me? Kyrie Irving, you play basketball better than most. Ain't no equality in basketball. You play it way better and way different than 99.9% of the people.
And on top of that, the level of entitlement that exists in professional sports are geared towards so-called black men. I made this statement in another video. If a coach had never seen 4 boys play basketball and they lined up next to each other, the black boy, the white boy, the Hispanic boy, and the Asian boy, the coach would naturally assume that the so-called black boy would be the best player before watching all 4 boys play. And that's called, or at least in this society, they will call that entitlement, because the coach would have a natural bias installed within his subconscious mind to watch the black boy play and give him a more favorable report, because he would think that his potential is higher than the other 3 boys. So there's bias everywhere. The issue is that there are also biases that exist within the mind of the so-called black man that limit him and limit us, therefore.
So to fight for that, when you know that the opportunities for equality is all you want to try and do, but that's going to be a lifelong mission. It's not going to be just solved in 1 week. Guess what? This world is as beautiful and as messed up as it was when you took your pause and after your pause. But this whole equality...
But that's the point, Marcellus Wiley. Kyrie Irving wanted to be missed. He wanted people to say, where's Kyrie? Why is he not playing? And then eventually it would be, oh, Kyrie's sitting out because of what occurred at the Capitol building. He thought that the world was supposed to stop because he didn't play basketball.
Conversation that he's trying to fight for, it sounds so amazing on paper until it has to land in reality, because no two things are the same.
Once again, Kyrie is not dealing with reality. He's dealing with idealism. He's a liberal. He lives on the liberal tree. He's just not on the same branch as a LeBron James, who's much more self-worshipful even than Kyrie. It's just that LeBron can compartmentalize better than Kyrie. And LeBron will say to himself, look, I have time to be woke, but I also have time to get these cheap stats and these cheap championships. Kyrie is much more sincere in his narcissistic altruism than LeBron James.
Imperfect beings trying to make something the same. It won't work. Whatever. We can have that conversation another place. But where he took me in this conversation was a little different. He said he needed to take a step back and realize what's important. I challenge people to take a step forward and know what's important.
Ding.
You do that, you see the difference. If you do what I just said, you don't need to take a pause.
What Marcellus Wiley basically is saying is that Kyrie Irving does not have his priorities in order. He doesn't have his priorities set, because if he did, he wouldn't have been forced to pause by the event that occurred at the Capitol building. I mean, it's just ludicrous that he had to take off 7 games because some white trash bum rushed the the House of the Congress. I mean, give me a break. Unless Kyrie was told to do that as a part of the ritual, because please keep in mind that on the roof or on the top of the dome of the U.S. Capitol building is a statue of the Mother Goddess, and we know that that's who he worships.
Already know what your commitment is, and you stay true to that commitment and keep all things flowing and all things going while you're still on your mission. So this pause, a lot of people say mental health, and mental health is a problem. I go to a therapist, I get it, but my therapist also jokes around. He's like, not everything that happens to you is a mental health issue. Not everything.
It depends on how mentally stable you are. For some people, everything is a problem.
Issue. Yeah, it's called dealing with life. Life brings issues you got to learn to deal with. If this is the way he wants to deal with it, I don't really want to condemn him for his ways, but I will look at him differently for tapping out on something else he needs to deal with while he's trying to deal with something else.
That's why everything you said is why I said, like, I don't have an issue with it because I can't. Because I'm not Kyrie. Exactly. I can't tell a person, hey, you know what? I have an issue with you protecting your mental health. I can't. But I can understand the problem with it. And the problem with it for me comes down to this. To whom much is given, much is required. In every aspect of life. Marcellus, you know this. Before I came on this show to host this show, I was a reoccurring guest on other shows. So if Emmanuel Acho's going through situations, tough life crisis as a reoccurring guest, you know what I can do? Take a time out. Hey, you know what? I don't want to do that show on Monday. I'll see y'all next week. I don't want to work on Friday. See y'all in a couple months. Because I can do that. Because not that much has been given to me. But as soon as they say, hey, Acho, you're hosting and co-hosting a show every day. Hey, you're on a billboard. Hey, this show, it features you and Marcellus. Hello.
I understand what you're trying to say, Acho, but now we have to evaluate and gauge exactly how important basketball is to Kyrie Irving in juxtaposition to his quote-unquote social activism. What you're laying out is what your priorities are, or what your understanding of the hierarchy of your priorities should be in your mind. So in other words, when you have a real hosting gig, that means that transcends your personal problems. While when you were a guest host or a guest on other shows, you know, of course, that wouldn't transcend your personal problems. Kyrie Irving is different. Kyrie Irving believes that if he feels, you know, emotionally upset enough about what's going on in the world, that he should be able to step away from basketball. And that's because of his overwhelming sense of self-importance.
You are 50% of that. Guess what? You got a little more pressure. You got to show up.
You got to show up, bro.
Last 10 days of my life, some of the hardest days of my life. But guess what? I showed up. If I was just a reoccurring guest, y'all wouldn't have seen me. But because I have more of a responsibility based upon the role I'm given on this team, you got to show up. Kyrie, if you were the seventh man off the bench, it's a little bit different. Less given, less required. But you are paid $34.
I'm not quite sure if I agree with that. I think that if he was the seventh man off the bench, he would have been less likely to take time off because he would have been more replaceable. He would have been more expendable. Kyrie understands his role in the NBA. Even if you want to argue about what his station is, top 10 player, top 15, top 20, top 25 player, he knows that when it comes to name recognition, he's easily top 10, if not top 5. So just based on that, he knows that he has a fair amount of equity that he can utilize to do what he wants.
$5 million a year. You are the face of the franchise. You are the star player. With all of those perks, don't necessarily mandate that you ignore certain things, but what it does is it begs of you that you figure out how to tolerate the issues as you continue to move forward, if at all possible.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. I love you. I'm a sociology major with a psychology minor degree. That means this is in the sweet spot. Like, sports is great. Yeah, because it was a living. It was a means to an end. But God, you are right where I want to be. And I know Kyrie was fighting for something that's admirable, something that we all fight for.
Allegedly, he's fighting for something that's admirable. I mean, brothers, when a basketball player states that he's fighting for world equality, that falls on me like someone saying that they're fighting to turn a square into a circle. Good luck.
But you got to keep it in perspective, big dog. Like this, it's a few things he mentions. The equality, even though even in your own family, you and Sam, not the same height, not the same weight, not the same acumen, not the same attributes, etc. No equality there. You here, he here, y'all make it work somehow. That's the orchestra we need to play in this world as a whole. We'll learn that and we'll get there over time. He also talks about what's happening in this world right now. We all know today is Inauguration Day, and a lot of people are celebrating, and a lot of people are sad because Trump is leaving and Biden's in. Whatever you are on that side of the ledger, respect to you. However, some people are going a little too far with it in terms of like the world's going to change because Biden is in there. I remind you that Trump's departure doesn't mean your arrival. You got to be committed to your life.
In other words, Marcellus Wiley's speaking to a lot of these liberal Negroes who think that their world is going to change because Joe Biden is in office. And as usual with liberal Negroes, they set themselves up for disappointment. Once again, all the liberal Negro is that woman who thinks that even though she's been with a man for years who's been whooping her ass and sleeping around on her, if she gives him good enough coochie and keeps making hot meals, that he's going to change, and he never changes. That's why liberal Negroes are such important pawns, because their job is to teach the children to do that. By the time, many of these so-called black children reach a certain age where they're meant to finally understand reality, for the most part, it's too late. And only a small percentage of so-called black children who were taught these lies about liberalism are ever going to wake up, period. So that's the importance and the relevance of the liberal Negro. But just getting back to the point, Marcellus Wiley was basically letting so-called Democratic or liberal Negroes know, just because Biden's coming into the White House does not mean that shit's going to change for you. You have to put forth the work the same way you should have under Trump.
Okay, take that home and digest it. The last thing is, let's bring it back on to basketball, but merge it with sociology. LeBron James had one of the best shows ever, and I don't think a lot of people gave it love, Survivor's Remorse. Did you ever watch Survivor's Remorse? Damn it! You're one of those people. All right. There was an episode where the owner of the basketball team was talking to a star player, and they were going back at it, and the star player got into his Deshaun Watson feelings. He started saying, you're slighting me, you're not respecting me, and, we're supposed to be partners, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I'm a grown-ass man, to the owner. And the owner looked at him and paused, gave one of them good theatrical pauses. He said, you know who doesn't say that? A grown-ass man. All I'm saying is, if you want to handle your business, you want to be a professional, you want to be that guy, be that dude, you got to keep it all in perspective and keep it all rolling. Coming up.
But anyway, that's basically it on that, brothers. We'll see what happens with Mr. Kyrie Irving over the course of the rest of this season. In my view, he's going to be on a tryout for the remainder of this season, up until the trade deadline. I think that the Nets, starting from Steve Nash, going all the way up to the owner, are going to check what their possibilities are, what their options are in moving him, depending on how well he fits in with the rest of the group. Because the fact of the matter is that James Harden and Kevin Durant are both discernibly better players than Kyrie Irving. They're both MVP quality players. Kyrie Irving sees himself as an MVP talent. He's never been that. He's never been really even close to that. I'll give him a bit of credit his first year with the Boston Celtics. Maybe like the first month and a half or so, maybe even the first 2 months, his name was being bandied about in the MVP runnings per se, but they petered out down the course of the season. And Kyrie just had major issues in understanding how to interact with teammates. As I've stated in previous videos, I think that he's an introvert trying to play in a league that's team-based and team-oriented. So we'll see what happens with him. If it was up to me, I'd trade him for some defense. So peace.